Howdy, all you delicious people. Squid Game, episode 5 and 6. I'll be brutally honest, I didn't care much for episode 5. Really, they were wrapping something up that I really didn't care about. So, episode 6. Let's say for both of these episodes, like if you're a very emotional person, if you've invested in people, and all of a sudden you end up finding out they're like, oh no, ooh-hoo, you start crying. Get some Kleenex, get some tissue, use your shirt, and just be like, woohoo! Or just have just the tears just fall to your face because that's who you are. It's a crier that you are, that all of a sudden you're just like, I'm just bawling my eyes out, boo-hoo! And that's who you are. And that's how you deal with your crying, is just letting the tears flow for whatever reason. Go ahead. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty of characters, and eventually someone is going to die. I even got freaking emotional by episode 6, because I'm like, God, I've invested in these people, and they're trying to make me tear up. Them sons of... Like, this is Sweet Tooth all over again. We're in, like, the Sweet Tooth review. I almost freaking lost it during that review. Like, I had to go and talk about that episode. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so freaking sad. And we get to where, in this part here, that we're starting to feel sad for people because they may or may not be alive. It's a really, really sad moment for 456. It's really freaking sad for 456, let's say that. God, why? Why did they do that? Why? Couldn't they just have certain things happen off camera where we don't actually see things happening, 100% not happening? Could this person have been teamed up with things where we don't see them at all, but then eventually we hear at the very end of the episode what ended up happening to this person? That sucked. That was sad. And so, just detach yourself right now. Pull out your heartstrings, not literally, figuratively. Just pull them out right now, so that way you do not tie yourself to any of these people, because you're going to get sad by the end of this review when I talk about what everything happened, because you'll already know, because you'll have seen this show, I hope, but decided to not spoil anything, I also hope also. Yeah. Anyways, if you want to talk about the episode within the episode, go ahead. But anyways, pushing on. So, I want to also thank everyone for watching this channel, or just watching this content. I really like this show. I hope that it goes on to do another season. If they have to just basically recast to do a whole, like, I'm game. Like, this show should possibly be good enough to do another season. Like, I know if everything is to be found out and, like, everyone is to get arrested after all this, they're just going to pop out another franchise of this thing. We're just going to have, like, Squid Game Australia or Squid Game other part of the country somewhere. Like, they're going to bust another one of these out somewhere in some other world. So, like, it doesn't have to be bottled to where they are. They can still do this kind of thing. Plus also, I don't know how expensive this show was to put together, but man, they're really just showing their budget. But anyways, especially when you get those, like, tons and tons of people all in that one room. Excuse me. My apologies. In the very beginning of the show, there's, like, so many freaking people. I'm like, man, with us basically doing that whole new normal situation and all that, but they have, like, 400 and some odd people all stacked in that one room. But anyways, let's go on. Let's talk about episodes 5 and 6. in a kind of teeing it up like fashion. So there might be something that I kind of mentioned about these episodes, much more so than I did before. So teeing it up, what happens in these episodes? Well, in episode 5, we mainly focus on the guy who I consistently call the detective. We mainly focus on him, and it seems that we have a wrapping up or conclusion of them stealing all these organs of these people's bodies. And that eventually they have the doctor who is to consistently be snuck in away to try to perform all of these surgeries. And eventually this guy is to get really, the doctor is to get to be at a point where he's getting more and more just irritated because he is heavily losing lack of sleep, having to perform all these surgeries, and then also have to, like, fend for his life. Even though these people need him to continue to do these surgeries and whatever, like, this guy also has to continue to fend for his life. And he is getting an advantage that no one else is getting. And so, like, that's kind of the focus of what episode 5 is. Episode 6 is an episode where immediately they go into a game, and then you're going to eventually start seeing people tricking one another. Eventually the real, like, we end up starting to just be like, oh man, this guy has just sold his soul down a river to try and stay here. And I'm like, like, God, you just start seeing this manipulation of people, and you just see people die. And it's so just, like, freaking the people that you're just like, God, why did you have to make me feel so sorry for this one person to have me just turn around and then have to probably also watch them die? Or there's some actual people where you're just like, you know what? Even though it feels horrible to say this, good, they died. Good. I kind of found their character to be honestly kind of annoying, but good, that person died. And I shouldn't feel that way, but you know what? It's just, like, they were a person that, like, they went into the path of just, like, they thought they could manipulate, they thought that they could just, thought they could work somebody, but it doesn't always work out. It's when you get movies like The Circle, where all of a sudden you have one guy who's seemingly, like, telling the whole entire circle what to do and who they should all kill off. And so they continue to do that over and over and over again up until they all of a sudden see that one person as like, hey, you have been ordering us to kill every single one of these people, and that honestly just makes you a murderer, so I think we should vote you off next. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, like I thought that I thought we were having, like, a democracy here, where I thought, like, I was going to be able to tell you guys what to do, and, like, and then all of a sudden eventually I would be saved after all this. No, like, you just eventually ended up putting a target on your head to just be like, well, like, just don't tell people what to do, just to kind of, like, play aloof. Just kind of just be like, well, like, let's vote this out. And if, like, if majority eventually votes this person out, then goodbye. So, and then eventually whoever that last vote was, like, well, maybe we should just, that he decided that person's death. No, that's awful. But true. Anyways, so yeah, so I've already been talking about this enough. like I can't really talk about what happens in episode 6 because there's a lot of big things that happen in episode 6. I can't talk about it. I can't, but I will when we get into spoilers. Episode 6 was one where we had this kind of goofy game again. I'm like, man, can't we just like red light, green light this? Could we go back to some like really just like fun childhood games or whatever? Like, why does it have to come down to like certain goofy kind of things? But like, uh, I can understand why they did what they did in episode 6, but like, I want to like consistently keep every game to be light and fun and whatever. Um, but eventually, it's kind of getting down to like some games where it's just like I'm like, okay, so they have to like customize it to not just be like a tug of war everything where the strongest person always survives or whatever, or the fastest person survives or whichever. So they have to kind of break it down to have it be like a common folk kind of game. And so I guess that's what every game is to really be. Like at first, like it's survival of the fittest, but eventually it eventually just dwindles down to just like, well, who is just smarter than someone else is? That's really what it just comes down to. So, with that said, yeah, let's go into that double 5 time territory. Let's break this thing down. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that I'm going to spoil this episode. So, episode 5. Really, the episode is to mainly focus again. Really just on them finishing up, them doing this whole like black market deal with these organs. Really, that's all episode 5 is. Yeah, there is to be us having the closure moment of when it ended up happening to everybody in episode 4. But mainly episode 5 is to really just go right into, okay, well, it seems that after 456 team eventually, like once that tug of war thing was to be done, basically the episode was just like, okay, well, like there isn't much teams left. I think there was only a team, like 2 teams that won that whole thing. Because like I didn't really see much of another team. So yeah, so let's get into it. Let's go. So episode 5. So 456's team was to be tugging a war with some other team. And so they were struggling and they were almost going to fall over the edge. So 218 decides like, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to take 3 steps forward when I say so. And so the team does that. All of a sudden the other team just falls over. And so that's when 456 team decides like, okay, we're going to pull this rope now. And we're going to pull these guys and we're going to push them. And so bizarrely, that actually works out where the team decides to take a couple of steps forward, dropping these people back. And so they pull them and these people just can't get traction enough to be able to regain their ground. So 456's team wins and the other team loses, sadly falls to their death. And like luckily they had that whole like guillotine kind of thing there, because otherwise the other team would have like been dragged along with this other team, like holding these people's weight. So luckily there was that thing to like cut the rope at the end of all this, or otherwise like freaking like we'd have 2 teams that'd be dead. And so on and so forth. So, or really, we'd still just have 1 team because, anyways, pushing on. So, 456's team goes and like they're in the room with all the beds and stuff, and so is 101's team. And they're like, "Hey, you guys made it, huh?" Like, all right, well, eventually they're having the consensus of just like, well, look, guess what we're gonna do? We're just gonna wait till nightfall, and then we're just gonna kill them in their sleep. Yeah, we're gonna do that again. And so it gets to the point where the other team is just like, we're like 456's team is like, dude, we're not gonna have that happen again. We're gonna put up some barriers. We're gonna we're gonna figure out how to just use bed pieces and whatever to just like stop these guys from coming in. And then two people are gonna consistently be on watch. And so the old man hasn't been sleeping like all freaking like night or whatever. And so you would have thought they would have just said, "Hey, man, like, man, you're old. Sleep." No offense. Like, they should have just been like, "Dude, like, you, like, stayed up all night to try to protect us, so just go ahead and take a nap. Just go ahead and just whatever." But this guy was like, "No, like, I want to be part of the team. Like, I'll do this watch." And it's like, okay, cool. So people start taking like their certain time, and they take their certain shifts. I'm like, how do they even know like how long they've been asleep and awake and whatever for? Like they don't really have a clock or much of a time or whatever, but I guess maybe they do somehow. I don't know. um but yeah, so they start taking like certain kind of, because how do they know like certain time has passed? In all honesty, let me pause this for a second. Reset time. So we push on with these characters, and so every one of them are taking certain kind of routes, and so like there's certain people that have kind of become friends with people. So like, hey, yeah, like we'll take the next thing, we'll take the next thing, and so on and so forth with this group. So eventually 101 is to go and talk with 456 and just be like, yeah, like you think all that is going to stop us from coming in and getting you? And 456 is just like, you know what, like with how small numbers that have really just dwindled down between all of us, and probably considering that you're the strongest guy here, what is going to not be a paranoidly thing of yours to think that while you're going to be sleeping at some point in time, someone's not going to cut your throat or kill you in the middle of the night because you're the strongest of us? Then 101 is like, oh yeah, that's right. And so 101 just decides that he's like, you know what, how about we just rest tonight? Like, how about instead of us going after these people, we'll just rest it out. Like, if anything, the whole tug of war thing was really challenging. Let's go and just sleep this off and just, like, see what happens the next day. So we have the doctor who's 111, who always sneaks away to supposedly go to the bathroom. And weirdly enough, we have 101's guys who is just kind of like watching and keeping a watch, and is like, yeah, like that doctor has been gone for a very long time, going to the bathroom supposedly. And so we end up finding out that this doctor is to consistently rip and tear people open. And so there's some of the hooded guys with the PlayStation logo on their head just kind of upset about the quality of what this guy is doing. And he's like, dude, like there's some people that aren't 100% alive or aren't 100% dead that I'm having to forcibly operate on. And so you're complaining about my quality of work as I have barely slept for X amount of days, and I have the fear of death of my life for every single day that I'm here, and you're to be concerned about my quality of work. Like, are you freaking kidding me? So, after the doctor is seemingly getting done with all of his surgeries, because eventually we have one of the other hooded characters that is to almost think, well, hey, like, I can probably just cut open a lot of people and I can probably easily be able to do this also. And the doctor's like, go ahead, try to do this. You won't do a good job at it. So eventually, what ends up happening is that it all comes down to this doctor is done getting his surgeries done. And so then the doctor asks the guys, okay, what's the next game? Give me the next hint. Give me the next clue. And so the hooded guys are just to tell this doctor, well, we have to confirm with our guy in the black mask, like, what we can tell you. And he's like, wrong answer. Like, I am fending for my life here. I want to know what the next game is now. And so they're like, well, we can't tell you that. So he's like, again, wrong answer. So this guy is putting a scalpel to one of these hooded guys' necks and like, you better tell me what this answer is. Tell me it now. Get your boss, get whoever you have to give me this answer. And so eventually it just comes to be that this doctor is just running off, running amok, and like eventually heads back into that giant jungle gym room where he's just to kind of hide out there until one of the triangle guys comes in there and is to try and say like, hey man, let's work together. Like, I'll take off my mask, you'll see my face, and like, you can trust me. Like, we're gonna work together, we're gonna help you. So we have the detective that is in one of his now circle costumes and is going with some other guy to take these organs to be sold. And we consistently have this detective guy who is to mention that he has forgotten things or that he is making mistakes or whatever. And now certain people are starting to just get like, you know, I'm not really trusting this guy. Like, I don't think there's something about him that doesn't seem quite right now. So eventually we have one of the guys turn on this detective and force him to take off his mask. And so then the other guy does the same thing. And we have this detective that is naturally assuming that one of the specific guys that had been missing a kidney that they had been talking about was his brother, because evidently his brother had given him a kidney. And the guy said no. Like, if anything, the person we call like the zombie or whatever, like, that is actually a woman. The reason why that is because me and some of the other guys were like were getting busy with her while she was dead. Like, guys were like poking their dinglings in her wyvern, let's just say, getting busy while this woman was dead. Good God. So yeah, the guys to mention that there are records to show about these people and what had happened to them. But eventually that just leads the detective to shoot this guy because he can't really trust him. So eventually what ends up happening is the guy with the black mask, like the black mask with the eyes and the nose and the face and whatever, not all the PlayStation logo things. So this guy goes into this playground and kills both the triangle guy that showed his face and also kills the doctor, because no one should have a unfair advantage in this game. No one. That if someone knows the game and no one else does, like, that's just a slippery slope. So, and then the man in the black mask is to eventually look on to find every single person tied to this whole ordeal, so he can hang them up and make an example of them to just say like, hey, if anybody ever cheats, we're gonna kill them. So once they start the next game, once these guys are walking through that weird, bizarrish stairway room, they see all the people who were dead from that whole situation. And they were told, like, yeah, we made an example of these people to say that no one should ever try to cheat to win. So everybody's like, okay, great. Like, I guess we figured out why that guy died. And so now we all of a sudden have the guy with the black mask who is looking for number 29, who is to have been that detective. And like some were thinking, well, maybe he like swam off. And the guy with the black mask says, no, like the scuba diving gear is still here. So obviously he's still in this area. So that's what really happens with episode, for most of episode 5. And so episode 6, they make an example of these people and say, hey, like, we don't tolerate cheating. So they start the next game, like, basically in the middle of night because everybody's forcibly awake anyways, because they had sounded off this, like, hurricane-esh, like, alarm kind of thing. Excuse me. To force everyone awake anyways, because really they were trying to find all the cheaters. They were finding all these people that did this thing. So pushing on. So in episode 6, because I'm trying to figure out if I covered everything in episode 5, which I feel like I did. So episode 6 is to really have these people now, like, really almost kind of separating from the pack. Because the next game is to involve 2 people instead of 10. So all of a sudden, we have 212 who's to basically think that, oh, well, I can manipulate a person, I can say anything to make people want to choose me. And, like, we have 212 who tells 218, hey, like, I can be your dream girl, we can do it as many times as you want to, and so on and so forth. And nobody is interested in tapping that after, like, 212 was involved in 101. Like, nobody wants the seconds after that whole event happened, in all brutal honesty. So 212 was trying to just say, like, hey, like, I'm going to end up with somebody, believe me. She was so confident about it. And, like, because she can easily manipulate people. But none of this group that stuck together with this whole tug of war thing, like, none of them were wanting any piece of 212. So everybody just starts to separate, and you immediately know who's going to be tied together. You're like, well, I'm assuming already that Ollie and 218 are going to be tied together because that's an obviously easy, like, they seemingly have been made best friends with one another, so that was an easy, like, no-brainer. And so 101 gets teamed up with his Igor character that's been kind of like his second-hand man throughout this whole thing. I think he was like 287 or something like that. And, like, I knew they were going to get teamed up together. And so 456 was looking for somebody, and I was like, Man, wouldn't it be cool if 456 teamed up with 67? But then again, I'm like, but what about one? What about one? Um, because immediately we see one and we're like, oh my god, no one's probably going to pick him. That sucks. And I knew that was going to happen. So 67 ends up just teaming up with the person she chose for Tug of War, which is 240, I think. 240. So, uh, so now, like, 456, in episode 5, one was to start to get sick, like, during his watch. And so, like, 456 was trying to take care of one and was trying to, like, figure out a way to, like, help one because he was starting to get sick. So 456, when like lights were on and everything like that, and people were forced to get ready for the game, all of a sudden one like didn't leave his bed, and 456 is like, "Hey man, one, we gotta get out, we gotta go and do this game," and we find out that one had spilled a little bit of stuff on his pants. He peed himself. Come on, everybody does it. Like when you're a kid or whatever, eventually you pee your pants. It happens. So the old man just kind of peed himself. So all of a sudden 456 goes and takes his like jacket off and just ties it around one. Is like, hey man, like it happens. Like, just wait till I get old and crusty and I wet myself. It's gonna happen. It's gonna be hilarious, right? Huh? You know? So eventually what ends up happening is one ends up giving 456 his jacket and just be like, hey man, like people will probably think less of you if you don't have a jacket on, so here's mine. So eventually 456 is like, hey man, one, let's team up. Come on. Like eventually he's just like, hey man, if we lose, then we'll lose. Like, and I die, oh well. Like, we don't know what this is. Maybe it's a battle of the mind kind of thing. And all of a sudden one has this one thing of knowledge that no one else has. That just pops out of there. And so maybe we just will need his brain for whatever. And so everyone just starts teaming up. Wives and husbands team up together because that's an easy thing. And so everybody just starts teaming up in a thing of twos. And so all of a sudden we end up finding out the only one that doesn't have a team member is 212. The one girl who's like, I'll be your dream girl. She's the one that ends up getting taken off and shot and killed. Unless she was to be just like taken and just to be held to eventually be used on some other game, which I doubt that is. Like, I think they just shot her because she was the uneven person that couldn't make a friend. That's, I think, the one thing that I don't think people, like, think about when they do, like, strategic stuff. Like, there might be some person on this game that it's, like, absurdly strong and just be a freaking friend to that guy. Or just if this guy has absurd amount of knowledge, beat that guy's friend also. But yeah, any of these games, most of these games, I've never heard of them before. Like, or we just have, like, in episode 6, we put these guys in this weird little, like, neighborhood maze, and so they separate all of them, and what they end up having them do is they give them, per group, or per 2 people, they give them 20 marbles. And so by the end of this time period, these guys have to figure out how to play games with these marbles to eventually win at the end of this. And whoever wins the 20 marbles eventually lives. And who doesn't have the marbles is to die. How they like somebody has to figure out how to get all of every single one of these marbles without having to go into violent means. So you can't murder your other person that you're with to get these marbles, which I was just waiting for someone to do that anyways, to like what if they were to have this like wrestling contest to like get these marbles or whatever. um that could have happened. They could have still had some kind of game. Anyways, pushing on. So now we have to start mentioning who is to sadly enough die during these rungs of things, because there's a lesser amount of people, and now I have to explain how everyone is to either live or die. So let's cover the 218 and Ollie thing. Let's cover that. So at first it seems that 218 was thinking like, well, if anything, let's just play an even and odd kind of game. And so all of a sudden, like, Ollie didn't understand how to play like seemingly any game that this was to be presented within this show. And so it seems that when they were doing the marble thing, it seems that Ollie was just really good at it. He was just really good at guessing. And so, like, 218 had one marble left, and he's like, no, I don't want to lose this way. So all of a sudden, 218 changed, like, to just be like, wait a minute, let's come up with a new game. Let's, like, how about we do, like, an all or nothing situation with some other group, and we kind of bet them something. Or we kind of bet them with our marbles about something, and like we'll get there, so we'll both survive. And Ollie's like, okay, well, I'll start looking around and I'll start like seeing who we can kind of like team up against and get their marbles from them. So all of a sudden, Ollie is looking around, and so 218 is to give him his stack of marbles, and 218 is like, hey, I'm gonna hold on to this one marble, like to just make sure that you're like not taking everything. So like I'll just have one marble. So Ollie goes off with his sack of marbles to go and find somebody, and so we end up finding out that 218 had completely turned on Ali, and 218 had every single marble in his sack, and he ended up telling the guy that was to tell Ollie to be shot. It's like, hey man, I got all 20 marbles right here. Kill Ollie. And so eventually Ollie is to eventually find that 218 is doing something shady. So Ollie goes and looks in his sack to find that it's not marbles in his sack, it's all rocks. And so 218, oh my god, this guy is so intelligent that he just outsmarted this guy and freaking killed him. A guy that he was like, yeah, man, we're gonna be best friends, we're gonna work this out, and all of a sudden he freaking kills him. They shoot Ali. They kill him. They kill 199 Ali, and I'm like, oh my god, in such a brutal way too. But like, that's not all, folks. There's a lot of brutal deaths here. So we rarely have 67 and 240 that are just to be like, well, how about we do this? How about we kind of wait till the time is really rung out? And so how about we just talk for a while? And so 240 is asking 67 a lot of questions about like, okay, what will you do like after like you win all the money? What will you do if you like what will you do if you got out of here and so on and so forth? And 67 is to mention about her family and is to like not really know what she's going to really do after she wins this whole thing. 240 is like, well, hey, why don't you go and have like mojitos, or why don't you go to some tropical island or something like that? And so 240 is to consistently say that she'll do that with her once this all is to be resolved. But then she's like, oh, yeah, that's right. We're going to die, either one of us. So that's going to be hard. Like, yeah. And she keeps saying that. So 240, eventually towards the end of the time, 240 is like, okay, here's the game that we're going to have. So you're going to take one marble, I'm going to take one marble, and you're going to toss it against this wall. Whoever hits the, whoever has the marble closest to this wall is going to be the winner, and is going to just win everything. So 67 goes and chucks this marble, hits it pretty good into the wall, and so 240 is just to take her marble and is to just drop it just like whoops, like Butterfingers, and 46 is like, dude, you didn't even toss the thing. And 240 was like, well, that's because I have nothing to go back to. That's because like you have a reason to win this money and I don't. So you are just going to move on. There we go. I had to connect things. So 46 just took the stuff and went off, and 240 died. You had to see her death, supposedly. So most of these, we don't have to see a lot of people's death like right in the face of just brutally seeing their deaths, because we've invested in these characters, so we should see most of their deaths off screen because that's the right move. So now, let's talk about 101. So 101 is with his little lackey, and all of a sudden his lackey is starting to be like, ha 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 ha, like, you know what, like, I'm gonna get one over on you, and you're gonna die, and guess who's gonna be the biggest and strongest guy here? So eventually they play the first round of this game, and so all of a sudden 287 is starting to win. And then 101 is like, hey, how about we play a brand new game? And the guy's like, no, we've already been playing this and you're almost losing. So 101 is to ask the guards, like, hey, can we play a brand new game? And they're like, sure. So all of a sudden 101 changes the game to basically be like this seemingly variation of golf, where this guy digs a hole and someone has to be like the closest they can possibly be to being inside this hole, and if they get inside the hole they immediately win. So now they're tossing these marbles back and forth, and so eventually what ends up happening is 101 eventually ends up winning out of all this, and because of one little slip of a marble. And so 287 wins, 101 collects all the marbles, and so 287 dies. Sadly enough, we didn't really care. Anyways, so now I think we've covered most of the side stuff. If there's probably one story out of here that I probably forgot about, it's bound to happen. So now we have to cover the 456 and 1 thing. We have to cover that now, which is freaking just the saddest freaking story, because all of a sudden we have 1 immediately after they find out what is going on here. 1 all of a sudden is slowly but surely supposedly losing his mind. 1 is all of a sudden just going on this thing about wanting to revisit this neighborhood, and all of a sudden wanting to just start like roaming through the streets and whatever. And 456 is like, no, we really have to play this game. Like, he's immediately just thinking this old man is losing it. And it's like, 456 is like, no, we really have to play this game. Like, please, let's just sit down and let's play this game together, and we'll just call it a day. So all of a sudden they're playing this game like even in odds where they're betting on things. And so all of a sudden one is like heavily winning. And so 456 is just to be like, oh my god, like I am going to die here. And like this guy has already just lost his mind. I'm losing to a person that has lost his mind. And how is this guy going to be able to succeed after this, after I even die? So, all of a sudden, we have one who is just starting to forget what he was doing, or he's starting to forget. He's starting to forget things. And so, one all of a sudden is mentioning, it's like, what did I say here? And so 456 corrects him to say the opposite thing. Then one is like, oh yeah, so I lost. And so we just consistently have 456 who is to try to now say the opposite thing to correct this guy to get all these marbles back. And so now we get to the point where now one doesn't really have much marbles left, and 456 just feels guilty about this. And so eventually, like, the guy who's won, like, 456 knows how many marbles this guy has left, and so the guy doesn't change anything. He just holds it into his hand and says, like, how many do I have left, odd or even? And so 456 says, of course, like, well, odd. And so the guy's like, well, I guess I lost again. But then we end up finding out that one didn't lose his mind whatsoever at all. One knew all along what 456 was doing. I'm like, oh my god. So, like, 456 was just kind of like, he was already feeling so bad about this. But then to find out that one was like, oh no, I haven't lost my faculties. Like, I knew what you were doing. Like, I knew you were kind of swindling me, but like, you know, like, but one was even talking about someone in his family who eventually, like, has a birthday coming up soon. And I was just like, oh my god, this is so awful. Like, where, like, one was trying to play this, but, like, if I were to have been 456 of, like, okay, like tattoo on this on my arm somewhere, like, your whoever's address, like, if I win this whole thing, I'm freaking giving this gift to this person, to just say, hey, like, I'm sorry that your relative is dead. It's my fault, sadly enough. Because 456 takes all the marbles and goes, and so one ends up getting shot out of camera, and so eventually 456 is just to just be told on the intercom that one was killed. And it was just like, god, that is so awful. So that's what really just ends this episode, is us just seeing the fact that one is now dead. So, yeah. So we're going to see who's all really left out of all the random people that we didn't really much care about. So we're going to see what ends up happening for the next game. And one thing that I really do not hope happens, because the Black Mask guy had mentioned that there were some stragglers that didn't come back. I am just freaking wondering if all of a sudden we're just going to get these people that is just going to come back by, like, the 6th game, and they're just going to be like, hey guys, we're back. And be like, like, people have been dying, people have been killed, people have been whatever, and all these people get a free pass to come to the very end of this whole thing. Because here's my thought process. If people were to have even come back or whatever, they should have just restarted this whole thing. But they didn't. They just go, okay, now that you guys are all to come back, you guys are just to be involved in the second game, which I'm like, wait a minute. Like, so people can just come back whenever they want and then just be, like, in the running? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, because I'm waiting, because they told us in that one episode that, hey, like, there's still people that are deciding whether or not to come back. And I'm like, God, if they come back, I swear to God, and by the 6th round, or the 6th game, or anywhere by the end, I will be ticked. Because that is so unfair for everybody that has consistently had their lives on the line, not sleeping for singly days on end, and to eventually have these moments where all these people who are kind of like, hey man, I slept great. Like, I'm back here. Like, I've been sleeping great. I haven't had, like, bullets being flying at me for whatever reason. Like, but hey, I'm going to come back and win all this money. Hey, doesn't that suck? Because, man, if they do that, if a person comes back right around the end, and they're like, ha ha ha, guess what? Like, I get to do this whole game, or I get to get all this money at the end of this because I'm a rando person who comes back. I would take and find that person, and, like, hopefully there's, like, a night beforehand while they're sleeping, dead. Maybe not by me. Let's not say that. But if person was to come back right around the end to squeak in there just to get that big fat payout without having to do any of the work, that person would immediately be dead. I would punch them to death if that's what I had to do. That sounds awful, but, like, nobody's going to be coming back late in the game. If they do, they're going to be dead. Because a lot of people had to die for these people to just come back whenever they wanted. So I'm waiting for that to happen. Because that's immediately going to tick a lot of people off. If people were sad during this episode, and then all of a sudden the very next episode it's like, hey, here's all these people that just returned now. Like, all the people that decided to just go home and wait this out, they all came back. Isn't that great? But, like, dead. They would be dead. They would be dead to me. Like, it would just... Like, I would be freaking so ticked off if I made it all the way through this, flying and dying and whatever, and all of a sudden these people come back late. I'm like, they're dead. I want them dead right now. I'm just going to sleeper hold them to death. They're going to be dead. And then they will have come back here for nothing. Because they'll be dead. That should have been a thing. Just be like, yeah, like, if you come back and you come back late, you come back dead. Like, yeah. Freaking get the guard squad out because they're going to shoot them all in the head because they're stupid. And plus, also, they decided, ooh, how late could I come back? Ooh, could I come, like, considering how, like, the games were paced, I think I should probably come back right around this day, right? Just be like, hey, I'm back, everybody. And just be like, motherfucker, really? Just dead. So, with that said, I hope I've covered these 2 other episodes. I'm sorry about how brutal that sounded, but wouldn't you get ticked off too? If your life was on the line and somebody just skates by, thinking that, like, that's like Biggest Loser. If you had, like, Biggest Loser, where, like, you're freaking working out like a mother, and you're crying because you're whatever you are, and so all of a sudden somebody ends up just coming in here, like, at the very tail end of the show, and then just wins the whole show because they lost, like, 50 pounds at home, and you lost, like 43 by being on the show, and you were, like, you were like heavily losing it, like on the show, just working your badukas off, and somebody went at home and just took like 4 laxatives and lost 50 pounds. Like, yeah, that would bother anybody anyways. So yeah, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody. But I hope I got everything. I always want to like closure that up to just be like, hopefully everything was covered. There's bound to be a slipper or a glipper of me just not saying something. It's always bound to happen. So just a bunch of marble games that end up going the way they did. A lot of people died, sadly. Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.